My name is Skip Conover, and I am tonight going to read the second part of Alchemy by Marie-Louise von France, an introduction to the symbolism and the psychology. And this is still in lecture 1 that I'm reading from today. If anybody is wondering what this is on my upper lip, I'm planning to play C.G. Jung in a play next June at our Confluence in Helena, Montana. And that will be the 10th to the 14th of June by invitation only. If you're interested, please write to me and we'll see if we can get you an invitation. And we will be doing a play called The Analyst and the Rabbi. This is the play. It's by Mary Stein and Henry Abramovich. And I will be playing Dr. Jung. So as you see, he has a mustachio. So that's, I'm practicing for next June. So yesterday I completed reading all of the lecture. I'm not really going to respond to chat until possibly at the end. I'm just going to read through. So I'm going to take my headphones off, and I guess everybody's hearing me fine. And so I'll be just reading the Q&A that Dr. von France had when she gave this lecture in 1959. Page 22, question. In a volume of ancient dream material by Oppenheim entitled The Interpretation of Dreams in the Ancient Near East, one feels that ancient dream interpreters were also interpreting on a collective basis. Do you think that is so? Von Franz, yes, in that they also made selections from the dreams. They took what connected with collective material. This applies also to Artemidorus. I know only one document from antiquity where there is a series of dreams which has not been selected, and that is in a text from the Serapeum of Memphis. A man called Ptolemaeus, his paper, I think, was published by Ulrich Wilken, got into some trouble, I believe, for debts, for which he should have been imprisoned, but instead he elected to become a novice, a katokos, in the Serapeum of Memphis, the Serapis Sanctuary of Memphis. According to the regulations, a katokos must write down his dreams, and we have Ptolemaeus's papyrus, a unique papyrus in Hellenized Egyptian Greek, in which there are the most amazing modern dreams. For example, I met Mr. So-and-so and said, and then would follow some banalities, and then the name again, and so on, which would be typical of our dreams. It is impossible to interpret such a dream, for one does not know the associations. In the series of about 27 dreams, there are 2 or 3 in which the goddess Isis, for instance, appears. Collective dreams in which collective figures appear, we can understand, but the others must be dropped because we have no associations. But Ptolemaeus says, for example, that he met his nephew, but nobody knows what the nephew meant to him. There is something else which was of great importance to me when I discovered this document, namely that those people dreamt exactly as we do. If you read the Babylonian dreams, You feel that they did not dream as we do. For in the Babylonian dream material, dreams are selected to fit the traditional interpretation. For example, a dream about a black goat pretends bad luck. Hundreds of other dreams of the same man who had such a dream are ignored, but because in collective tradition, a black goat appearing in a dream means bad luck, that dream was recorded. That is still the case in our peasant countries, where nobody takes any notice of ordinary dreams. But if anybody dreams about a coffin or a wedding or a snake, that is discussed, and they wonder if anyone in the family is going to die. That only applies to traditional motifs. All the other material goes down the drain. For the fragments of the dreams of Ptolemaeus, show something completely different from the dream literature of antiquity. And one realizes the people then dreamt just as we do, though dream literature only relates to the few dreams which fitted their theories. If you dreamt the house was on fire, then you were in love, etc. You can always see how they arrived at their interpretations, which were not too bad, for it is quite likely that someone in love would dream of a house on fire. Such books are built up on average experiences. But all medieval dream material, as well as that of antiquity, is concretistic. That is, if somebody is going to die, you will have a visitor who will receive or lose money, and so on. A dream is never taken as an inner thing or an inner process, but is always projected onto the outer world. Even nowadays, simple people here in Switzerland often discuss their dreams, but only on a prognostic level. I analyze a charwoman, and the other day, her brother rang me up and asked why I was making his sister still madder by analyzing her dreams. The dreams were all junk, which he had proved himself, for he had 3 times dreamt of coffins last winter, and nobody in the family had died. He still thinks of the classical Greek, Egyptian, Babylonian way. Let us go back to the original tradition of little primitive groups living together and say that this is a man among them has this. Let us go back to the original traditions of little primitive groups living together and say that a man among them has dreams or visions. There are 2 possibilities open to him. If he knows someone who is supposed to be a shaman or a medicine man or a priest, then he goes to him and accepts his interpretation, or he can remain independent and build up his own dream interpretation, draw his own conclusions and work out a whole system. Remark. So it depends upon the attitude and understanding of the person in authority. Ultimately, it revolves into the question of whose authority is most to be respected, that of the interpreter according to tradition, or of the person who has had a dream experience. Dr. von Franz. Yes, and ultimately on the person who has most mana, the great personality who leads the more spiritual life and has greater authority. For instance, sometimes people keep their experiences to themselves, even in these primitive countries, and develop their own system. But if then they fail in life, they are looked upon as fools. So the man who is arrogated enough to want, so the man who is arrogant enough to want to remain alone risks being regarded as someone possessed and a fool instead of a great medicine man. He has to run that risk, and only life can show which is correct. But even such tribes discriminate between fools who are possessed and medicine men. Remark: in Christian terminology, you could say that such a man was carrying his cross, but everything depended on his motive. Dr. von Franz: yes, exactly. Or, for instance, in the Catholic heresiology, someone may have an individual revelation of God, which causes him to deviate from church dogma. Let us imagine that he has a vision of Christ in which Christ tells him that he is half an animal or something like that. Then he would say that he knows that Christ not only incarnated as man, but even on the level of an animal. If a man believes that, the Inquisition, which condemns him to be burnt, says also that he may still be saved and still be right. He has to be burnt because the Orthodox creed must be defended. But the door is left open. They say that the heretic may be right, but that if he wants to adhere to his personal truth, he must accept being burnt for it. They do not claim that he has lost his soul for God. For God may accept him in paradise, but it is his fate also to be burnt. What a political cop-out, huh? Such a thing represents a kind of spiritual modesty, for while condemning him to be burnt, they neither condemn his soul nor claim that he has missed salvation. Such a person is proud or lonely or spiritually independent enough to rely on his own beliefs and personal experiences and must accept the consequences. But the community will not accept him in Catholic circles. In other circles, the attitude may be different. Modern Catholic teaching is also slightly modified in a manner which I heard recently. A Jesuit told a friend of mine that you are allowed to believe something, like the man in the tribe mentioned above, provided you do not tell anyone else about it and do not make a doctrine of it and try to convert others to the same beliefs. If you just keep it to yourself and decide not to reject your inner vision, then the Catholic Church will close its eyes to it. I think a lot of us would be burnt at the stake today. I know Dr. Jung thought he was a prime candidate. Okay, reading on. Remark: I think that applies not only to the Catholic Church, but to any group of people. It depends on whether the individual believes that he can tell his group of his experience or not. Dr. von Franz: yes, which is why I often say to schizoid people that their madness does not consist of what they see and believe, but in telling it to the wrong people. If they kept it to themselves, it would be all right. I have, for example, a borderline case of a woman who goes to every psychiatrist and accuses them all of being idiotic rationalists who do not believe in God, and she tells them her visions. I think her only mistake is in telling these people, for that is simply being unadapted. Her visions in themselves are quite all right, and also what she thinks about them. But an extroverted feeling is inferior. She is socially unadapted. She should not speak of such things to a rationalistic psychiatrist who only wonders whether he should intern her. Yeah, remarks. No, because his reputation in turn is at stake. Dr. von Franz, yes, of course. His colleagues would scoff at him if he started believing in his patients' visions. Colleagues always behave like that and speak of countertransference, etc. It is so much a question of ambition and prestige and of collective convention, just as it is with us. There is another aspect to the problem of alchemy, namely, why it is of such importance to modern man. Alchemy is a natural science which represents an attempt to understand material phenomena in nature. It is a mixture of the physics and alchemy of those early times and corresponds to the conscious mental attitude of those who studied it and who concentrated on the mystery of nature, particularly the material phenomena. It is also the beginning of an empirical science. I will go into the specific history later. The average modern man, particularly in Anglo-Saxon countries, but also increasingly in European countries, is trained mentally in the observation of natural science phenomena, while the humanities, as you know, are more and more neglected. That is a present-day tendency in which ever-increasing emphasis is placed on the scientific approach. If we analyze modern people, you find that their outlook on reality is very much influenced by the basic concepts of natural science, and that the compensatory or connecting material from the unconscious accordingly is similar. That is a superficial analogy, for the reason lies much deeper. If one asks why natural sciences predominate to such an extent in our Weltanschauung, it can be seen to be the end result of long and specific development. As you probably know, looked at from the more specific European aspect, natural science is regarded as having originated in the 6th century BC, about the time of the pre-Socratic philosophy. But this was largely philosophical speculation about nature, for there was very little experimental investigation on the part of the early natural scientists. It could more correctly be said that the birth of natural science as a theory or general concept of reality took place at that time. Natural science, in the sense that man has always experimented with animals, stones, materials, matter, and fire and water, is much wider, and in former times was a part of those magic practices which are connected with all religions and which deal with materials. There are a few exceptions. Therefore, one might say that in his outlook on the ultimate realities of life, man is overwhelmed by ideas and concepts from within symbols and images, but also deals with outer materials. That explains why in most rituals, there is something concrete representing the symbolic meaning. For instance, a bowl of water placed in the center for divination, or something of that kind. Thus, matter and material phenomena are approached in a magic way. And therefore, in the histories of religion of different people, there are religious symbols which are personifications of representations of demons with half personified aspects, as well as divinities, i.e., powerful factors which have a material aspect. You all know the concept of mana, which even by non-Jungian investigators of religion is compared to electricity. If an Australian rubs his Churunga stone to get more mana, it would be with the idea of refueling his totem or his life essence, like recharging an electric battery. The whole concept of mana bears the projection of semi-material, divine electricity or divine energy or power. Thus, for instance, trees struck by lightning would represent mana. Then in most religious systems, there are sacred substances such as water or fire or certain plants and so on, as well as spirits, demons, and incarnate gods who are more personified and can speak in visions or appear and behave in half-human manner. At times, the emphasis lies more in the depersonalized nature, power symbols, and other times more on personified powers. In some religions, one aspect is more dominant, and in others, the other. For example, the religious system, which in its decaying form is mirrored in the Homeric poems, in which the Olympic and half-personified human Greek gods with their human deficiencies appear, is an extreme form of mainly personified deities. On the other hand, there is the counterswing in Greek natural philosophy, for instance, where suddenly the whole emphasis is placed on symbols such as water, which is said to be in the beginning of the world, or the fire in Heraclitus, etc., which is a revivification of the mana idea in higher level. In Christianity, there is a mixture. God the Father and God the Son are usually represented in art as human beings, and the Holy Ghost is sometimes represented as an old man with a beard, absolutely as a cliche for God the Father, just identical, but frequently by an animal, which in another form of personification, or it may represent by fire or wind or water or the breath between God the Father and this God the Son. So the Holy Ghost, even in the Bible, has certain forms in which it is described or likened to such natural phenomena as fire or water or breath. Thus, Christianity has a God image representing both aspects. But in other religions, there are either a number of human or other gods, so that we probably have to make the hypothesis that the unconscious likes to appear in its ultimate archetypal manifestation, sometimes symbolized by natural phenomena and sometimes personified. What does that signify? Well, before I go to that signification, I want to share with you figure 4 from the book, which I will share right along as we go. But I have to get it on my screen. Okay, here's figure 4 that I'm referring to, which is right at the point that I am reading in this. And so figure 4 is William Blake's image of God the Father as a wise old man with a beard, a typical personification of the self, archetype of wholeness, and the center of the personality. And I'll let you go back in the replay and look at that. This comes from William Blake's 22 plates on the book of Job, which and Dr. Edinger put comments on all these plates and calls it symbols of the self or something like that. And it's an excellent little book. He calls it his portable analytic hour. And so I would urge you to go ahead and look at that. I read it entirely into this YouTube channel, so you can find Edinger's book on the homepage of this YouTube channel. Okay, so that was number 4. Reading on. And I have a little mark in my book that says God here. And I'll just read what I marked. It's a very difficult question. Why, for instance, has someone a concept of God as a divine, indivisible, all-pervading fire, while another person will imagine him as being something like a human being? Nowadays, people tend to think that a small child with kindergarten concepts will think of God the Father with a white beard, while later, when scientific views have been acquired, then, if thought of at all, it would be rather as a meaningful power in the cosmos or something of that kind. But then we just project our own scientific situation. So far as I can see, it is not true that such personified manifestations or ideas of gods or the Godhead are more infantile. Okay. Let me read that paragraph again because I think it's quite important. It is a very difficult question. Why, for instance, has someone a concept of God as a divine, invisible, all-pervading fire, while another person will imagine him as being something like a human being? Nowadays, people tend to think that a small child with kindergarten concepts will think of God the Father with a white beard, while later, when scientific views have been acquired, then, if thought of at all, it would be rather as a meaningful power in the cosmos or something of that kind. But then we just project our own scientific situation. So far as I can see, it is not true that such personified manifestations or ideas of God or the Godhead are more infantile. To be able to answer the question, we should be obliged to study carefully a lot of dream material and then, quite apart from the religious problem, ask ourselves what it means if an archetypal content manifests as a ball of fire instead of as a human being. So let us say that there are 2 men, and one dreams of a ball of fire, which gives him comfort and enlightenment, and the other dreams of a marvelous, wise old man appearing to him, and both are equally overwhelmed. Superficially, you could say that both images symbolize the self, that is, the totality, the center, a form of manifestation of the image of God. This is the difference when one man experiences light or the fireball, while the other, the superhuman wise man, appears. Answer. The former would represent the abstract meaning. Dr. von Franz, yes, one is more abstract here, but it is abstractus from what? Remark, it would be further from the human. Von Franz, yes, per definitionem. But how would you reply to the analysand who asked you such a question? We can never give an absolute answer, but we can say something about it. I would take it quite simply and ask the patient and would try to lead him on. You can talk to a wise old man, ask him questions, or can present him with all your human problems, whether you should divorce or if you should spend your money in a certain manner, and you can assume that since he appears in this form, he should know about that, though perhaps he will say that he is far removed from such things. In any case, the primary feeling or guess or the attitude which it evokes is that you can relate to such a figure on a human level, but you cannot talk to a ball of fire or make contact with it except in some form of natural science, perhaps catch it in a glass bowl if that is possible, or watch it and see what it does. Go on your knees and worship it and keep far enough away so as not to be burnt, or go into it and discover that it is fire which does not burn, but that is not possible to relate to it in human form. So manifestation in a human form would demonstrate the possibility of conscious relation. Conscious relation suggests Dr. Jung's idea of active imagination. Whereas in human form, or a natural power form, is just a phenomenon and cannot be related to as such. Obviously, whatever the divine is, it has both aspects. And in most theologies, this has been maintained. What is a God to whom you cannot relate? If you cannot tell him anything about your human soul, what use is he? If you cannot tell anything about your human soul, what use is he? On the other hand, what is a God who is merely a kind of human being and does not reach beyond that? He also seems to be the completely mysterious other to which you cannot relate, just as you cannot relate to mysterious phenomenon in nature. Therefore, probably there have always been the two aspects of this ultimate inner center of the psyche, one being completely transcendent, which manifests in something as remote as fire or water, and another which sometimes manifests in human form, which would mean that it was now approaching in a form to which one could relate. If someone dreams of the Godhead as a human being, then there will be a great deal of emotional and intuitive feeling experienced of it and of its nearness. St. Nicholas dreamt or had a vision of Christ coming as a berserk. And in the same vision, the berserk afterwards told people the truth about themselves. He saw into them and what they really were, and people ran away from him. He knew at once what they wanted to ask him, and very often did not even put a question, but simply gave the answer. Therefore, obviously, St. Nicholas had the same quality as Christ had in his vision, which would be an illustration of something belonging to the archetypal unconscious and entering the human form. If you dream of an archetype in a human form, that means you could, to some extent, incarnate it. It could manifest in you and could express itself through you. That is the whole idea of the inner Christ. If you dream of the wise old man, then it can happen that you get into an impossible situation where you are asked an impossible question, and suddenly a perfect answer comes to you. If you are honest, you feel obligated to admit afterward that it was not you speaking. It spoke through you. You could not claim to have had such a thought. That would be the wise old man manifesting in you, someone or something not identical with the ego, but helpful in a difficult situation. So how many pages we have to go here? Okay, 7 more pages. Why do you necessarily deny identification with the ego? Dr. von Franz, because if you identify, you get into an inflation. You must be honest about it. You have made a mental effort. You can say that it was your thought, but it was sometimes happened to me that I have said something and afterward people have quoted it saying that by that I saved their lives. If I am honest, I reply that I had not realized that I was saying what I was saying, but said what came to me. And that happened to be something much wiser than anything I could have thought. But even if you make the effort to subjectively, but even if you make the effort and subjectively have the feeling that you thought it out, actually it came from the unconscious. For without its cooperation, you cannot produce anything. Even if you say that at 12 o'clock you must remember to do a certain thing, if the unconscious does not cooperate, you will forget it. For, of course, any kind of mental insight comes from the unconscious, but that is an exaggerated postulate, for sometimes you have the feeling that you have worked out something by your own efforts, while another time that the idea just came to you without conscious effort on your part. One must be naive and honest, not be inflated and claim such good ideas for oneself. It was the wise old man or the wise old woman or the divinity speaking, if this is confirmed by dreams. If someone dreams of the wise old man and has such an experience, then that is an empirical demonstration. The fireball will not provide the same experience, though in a way it is even more marvelous, for the person will be much more affected emotionally. He will be overwhelmed, gripped by the mystery, by the complete otherness of the divine. An experience of the divine is often of an overwhelming power beyond one's own comprehension, which is dangerous, but to which one has to adapt. As one has to adapt to a manifestation in nature, such as the explosion of a volcano. That is a beautiful sight, but one must not get too near, and it is impossible to relate to it. You can only look at it, but it is something which you will never forget. Emotionally, it does something to one, but it would need a poet to describe it that would correspond to the manifestations of the archetype as natural phenomena. Nature has a numinous and divine aspect as experienced by the human being, which explains why the human image of God has both aspects. In most religions, there are personifications of God in both forms. In the history of the development of the European mind, a strange kind of enantiodromia and opposition was developed since Grecian times. In the Homeric religion, the personified aspect was exaggerated. In the natural philosophy of pre-Socratic philosophers, the nature aspect was exaggerated, while in Stoicism, more emphasis was laid on the nature aspect. In Christianity, there was at first a return to a more personified aspect. From the 15th and 16th centuries on, emphasis was again placed on the nature aspect. It seems as if in the development of the European mind, there began a certain balancing of the opposites, namely of the difference or contrast between science and religion, which became the great pseudo problem of later modern times, science versus religion. Okay, a little more. Hope everybody's. I refer to it arbitrarily and derisively as a pseudo problem, because originally it was no problem. And actually there was only the one thing, the search for the ultimate truth. If you return to that question and say that your interest is in truth and not in which faculty of the university it is to be found, then the problem collapses. Some people are caught in the projection of the nature power representations of the archetype, and others in the personified powers, and the two fight. Some among you might object, asking how natural scientists could also be caught by projections. To an analyst, that is self-evident, but I want briefly to speak to those among you who have perhaps not given much thought to these things. If you read the history of the development of chemistry, and particularly of physics, you will see that even such exact natural sciences could not and still cannot avoid basing their thought systems on certain hypotheses. In classical physics, up to the end of the 18th century, one of the working hypotheses arrived at either unconsciously or half-consciously was that space had three dimensions, an idea which was never questioned. The fact was always accepted, and perspective drawings of physical events, diagrams, or experiments were always in accordance with that theory. Only when this theory is abandoned does one wonder how such a thing could ever have been believed. How did one come by such an idea? Why were we so caught that nobody ever doubted or ever discussed the matter? It was accepted as a self-evident fact, but what was the root of it? Johannes Kepler, one of the fathers of modern or classic physics, said that naturally space must have three dimensions because of the Trinity. So our readiness to believe that space has three dimensions is more recent offspring of the Christian Trinitarian idea. Further, until now, the European scientific mind has been possessed by the idea of causality, an idea hitherto accepted without question. Everything was causal, and the scientific attitude was that investigation should be made with that premise in mind, for there must be a rational cause for everything. If something appeared to be irrational, it was believed that its cause was not yet known. Why were we so dominated by that idea? One of the chief fathers of natural sciences and great protagonist of the absoluteness of the idea of causality was the French philosopher Descartes. And he based his belief on the immutability of God. The doctrine of the immutability of God is one of the Christian tenets. The divinity is unchanging. There must be no internal contradictions in God or new ideas or conceptions. That is the basis of the idea of causality. From the time of Descartes onwards, this seems so self-evident to all physicists that there was no question about it. Science had merely to investigate the causes, and we still believe this. If something falls down when one must find, if something falls down, then one must find out why. The wind must have blown it, or something like that. And if no reason is discovered, I am sure that half of you will say that we do not yet know the cause, but that there must be one. Our archetypal prejudices are so strong that one cannot defend oneself against them. They just catch us. The late physicist, Professor Wolfgang Pauli, frequently demonstrated the extent to which modern physical sciences are in a way rooted in archetypal ideas. For instance, the idea of causality as formulated by Descartes is responsible for enormous progress in the investigation of light, of biological phenomena, and so on. But that thing which promotes knowledge becomes its prison. Great discoveries in natural science are generally due to the appearance of a new archetypal model by which reality can be described. That usually precedes big developments. for there is now a model which enables a much fuller explanation than was hitherto possible. So science has progressed, but still any model becomes a cage. For if one comes across a phenomena difficult to explain, then instead of being adaptable and saying that the phenomena do not conform to the model and that a new hypothesis must be found, one clings to one's hypotheses with a kind of emotional conviction and cannot be objective. Why shouldn't there be more than 3 dimensions? Why not investigate and see where we get? But that people could not do. I remember a very good illustration given by one of Pauli's pupils. You know that the theory of ether played a great role in the 17th and 18th centuries, namely that there was a kind of cosmic air-like pneuma in the cosmos in which light existed, etc. One day, when a physicist at the Congress proved that the theory of ether was quite unnecessary, an old man with a white beard got up and in quavering voice says, "If ether does not exist, then everything is gone." This old man had unconsciously projected his idea of God into ether. Ether was his God, and if he did not have that, then there was nothing left. The man was naive enough to speak of his ideas, but all natural scientists have ultimate models of reality in which they believe, just like the Holy Ghost. If it is a question of belief, not of science, and therefore something which cannot be discussed, and people get excited and fanatical if you present them with a fact which does not fit the frame, they are capable of saying that the whole experiment is false and photographs must be produced, and it is practically impossible to get them to accept the fact. I know a physicist whose dreams pointed to a new discovery not yet made, and which he himself had not made, but which was in the air, so to speak. From the dreams, we concluded that his belief in the symmetrical relationship between material phenomena should be given up. The physicist said that such an idea would drive him crazy, but about 3 months later, exact experimental results were published proving that what he had dreamt was correct and that he would have to drop his former ideas about the cosmic order. Okay, I'm going to come back to the chat after the reading. So the archetype is the promoter of ideas and is also responsible for the emotional restrictions which prevent the renunciation of earlier theories. It is really only a detail or specific aspect of what happens everywhere in life, for we could not recognize anything without projection. But it is also the main obstacle in arriving at the truth. If one meets an unknown woman, it is not possible to make contact without projecting something. You must have a hypothesis, which of course is done quite unconsciously. The woman is elderly and probably a kind of mother figure and a normal human being, etc. You make assumptions and then you have a bridge. When you know the person better, then many earlier assumptions must be discarded and you must admit that your conclusions were incorrect. Unless this is done, then you are hampered in the contact. At first, one has to project and there is no contact, but then one should be able to correct the projection. And it is the same not only as regards human beings, but everything else also. The projection apparatus must of necessity work in us. Nothing can even be seen without the unconscious projection factor. That is why, according to Indian philosophy, the whole of reality is a projection, which it is in a subjective manner of speaking. To us, reality exists only when we have projections on it. Question: can you relate without projection? Dr. von Franz: I don't think so. Philosophically speaking, you cannot relate without projection, but there is a subjective feeling status in which you sometimes feel that your projection fits and that there is no need to change it, and another status in which you feel uneasy, thinking that it ought to be corrected. But no projection is ever corrected without such a feeling of uneasiness. Let us assume that there is in you an unconscious liar, and you meet someone who lies like a trooper. You can only recognize the liar in the other because you are a liar yourself. Otherwise, you would not be aware of the other. A quality in another person can only be recognized if one has the same quality and knows what it feels like to lie, and therefore one recognizes the same thing in the other person. Since the other person really is a liar, you have made a true statement, and why should you call that a projection, which should be taken back? It makes a basis for relationship. For you think of yourself, you think to yourself, if X is a liar, whatever he tells me, I must not believe entirely. I must question it. That is very reasonable and well adapted and right. It would be very wrong to think it was only one's projection and that one should believe the other person. One would be a fool to do so. But if you take that philosophically, then it is a projection or a statement of fact. Philosophically, you cannot reach a conclusion. You can only say that subjectively, it seems to be correct. That is why Jung says, and this is a subtle point which is seldom understood when people think about projection, that we can only speak of projection in the proper sense of the word when there already exists a certain uneasiness, when the feeling identity is disturbed. That is, when I have an uneasy feeling as to whether what I have said about X is true or not. Until that has happened autonomously within me, there is no projection. The same thing applies to the natural sciences. For instance, the theory that matter consists of particles is based upon the projection of an archetypal image. For a particle is an archetypal image. Energy is also an archetypal image, an intuitive concept with an archetypal background. It is not possible to investigate matter without such hypotheses, i.e., that there is something like energy, something like matter, and something like particles. But I may meet that with phenomena which give me a feeling of uneasiness. For instance, there are phenomena where I cannot speak of this electron or this meson being in a given moment at a definite place, although if there is such a thing as a particle, then it must be at a certain place at a given time. That seems to be archetypally self-evident. But now modern experiments show that this theory is untenable, that you cannot determine where certain electrons are at a particular moment. So we are confronted with a fact which calls into question our whole idea of the particle. Now we are uneasy and might recognize that in part, we projected in speaking of particles. It is a projection that hampers our view of reality. But before the uneasiness arises, due to the fact that our projection does not fit, there in certain experiments, the particle does not behave as one would expect. our concept would not be doubted. So in natural science, just as in interpersonal contexts, there is the same problem of projection. Even the most scientific and most modern, most accurate forms of modern natural sciences are all based on projections. Progress in science is the replacement of a primitive projection with one more accurate, so that one can say that natural science is concerned with the projection of models of reality into which phenomena might seem to fit better or less well. If the phenomena apparently click with my model, then it is all right. But if not, then I must revise my model. How that links up is a great problem. As you know, there was a famous quarrel between Max Planck and Einstein, in which Einstein claimed that, on paper, the human mind was capable of inventing mathematical models of reality. In this, he generalized his own experience because that is what he did. Einstein conceived his theories more or less completely on paper, and experimental developments in physics proved that his models explained phenomena very well. So Einstein says that the fact that a model constructed in the human mind in an introverted situation fits with the outer facts is just a miracle, and just to be taken as such, Planck does not agree, but thinks that we conceive a model which we check by experiment, after which we revise our model so that there is a kind of dialectic friction between experiment and model, by which we slowly arrive at an explanatory fact compounded of the two. Plato, Aristotle in a new form, but both have forgotten something, the unconscious. We know something more than those two men, namely that when Einstein makes a new model of reality, he is helped by his unconscious, without which he would not have arrived at his theories. Okay, here's a starred point. But what role does the unconscious play? The unconscious seems to deliver models which can be arrived at directly from within without looking at the outer facts, and which afterwards seem to fit outer reality. Is that a miracle or not? There are two possible explanations. Either the unconscious knows about those other realities, or what we call the unconscious is a part of the same thing as outer reality, or we do not know how the unconscious is linked with matter. If a wonderful idea as to how to explain gravitation comes up from within, can I say that it is the non-material unconscious giving me a wonderful idea about material reality? Or should I say that the unconscious gives me such a marvelous idea of outer reality because it itself linked with matter? It is a phenomenon of it. Okay, so here's the figure that's in the book for what it's worth. Number 5, releasing the spiritus from the heated prima materia, a projection image of what happens psychologically in the conscious assimilation of activated unconscious contents. So we could say, for example, that political debate has stirred up things that were asleep down in the deep unconscious and activated them. And so they're now playing around on the surface, something like that. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so there's one more page. I'm going to continue on here. there we are at our wits' end as to how to proceed, and have to leave the question open and say that the great X is that we do not know how to proceed. We can make two hypotheses. Dr. Jung is inclined to think, though he has never formulated the thought, or only hypothetically, because we cannot do more. We can only speculate or make a hypothesis. That probably the unconscious has a material aspect, which would be why it knows about matter, because it is matter. It is matter which knows itself, as it were. If this were so, then there would be a dim or vague phenomenon of consciousness even in inorganic matter. And I think that may have been proved in the universe over the last couple of decades. There we touch on great mysteries, but I speak of them because it is too cheap to say that the old alchemists, i.e. the medieval natural scientists of antiquity, projected unconscious images into matter, and nowadays we are enlightened and know what the unconscious is and what matter is. But those poor fellows just did not distinguish between the two, which explains why they were so backward and fantastic and unscientific. The psyche-matter problem has not yet been solved, which is why the basic riddle of alchemy is still not solved. The answer to the question they pursued, we have also not discovered. We can have projections of many things, just as they had about matter, but we prefer to speak of theirs as naive projections of the unconscious, for we have outgrown those models. We can still recognize them as phenomena of the unconscious, of dream stuff, but we cannot recognize them anymore as being scientific. For instance, if someone says that lead contains a demon, we can say that he projects the shadow and demonic human qualities into lead, but we can no longer claim that lead contains a demon, for there we have outgrown the projection and have reached a different conclusion as to how and why lead is harmful to us. Basically, however, alchemy is still an open problem to us, which is why when Dr. Jung touched it, he felt that he was touching something which led still further, and he did not yet know where. I think that is also partly why people have such resistance to alchemy, for it confronts us with something we cannot yet understand. But that is a good thing, for it puts one back upon oneself and into the modest attitude of having to describe phenomena in accordance with our present knowledge. Next time, I will begin with our first Greek text. Okay, so that's the end of the lecture, but there's one more important image here, which I want to share with you because we had a funny exchange about it yesterday in the advanced reading group. Okay, so here the alchemist and his assistant are kneeling by the furnace praying for God's blessing. And the assistant is the feminine, and there are all kinds of symbols of the feminine in this. But the point is that many times the early alchemists had no idea what was going to happen when they heated up their materials, and very often they blew up. And I mentioned that yesterday to Colleen Kibert, who is a ceramic artist, and she was saying, well, the first time she used this very large kiln that she had bought, it in fact did blow up on her. And so even today we have this problem. So let me go back and look through these chats. I'm not sure I can get to everything tonight, but let me see what I can Wow, there's a lot of discussion here. Enjoying the content. Okay. So Chosen One says, please talk about using LSD as the philosopher's stone for manifesting one's reality. Absolutely, I will not do that because that is being researched by better scientists than me. And I don't agree that it is a method for manifesting your reality. It is, if you get any wisdom out of it, it's not earned. And you're never going to be able to say it was earned. And I have 5 people in my extended family who have overdosed by using drugs. And so I absolutely always, forever and always, deny that one should manifest your reality by using drugs or any other such thing. Sorry about that. Where can I buy some Philosopher's Stone? Perhaps has some. Well, the answer to that is you buy it by living your life, and often painfully. And people ask me what advice I would give to a young man, and my answer is always make mistakes, make your mistakes as fast as you can, because that's how you learn and where wisdom comes from. And so if you want to get to the Philosopher's Stone faster, just make more mistakes faster. And then gradually you become a gray mustache or something like that. Okay. I wonder how many tabs the geezer reading the great literature on alchemy has done. And the answer to that is none, and I have no intention of starting now. And thank you for your comment about me being a geezer. I admit that I'm 75 years old. And so if you don't wish to listen to me, please do not. But if you're going to simply offend me, then I'm going to block you from this channel. Very simple. And Chosen wants me to present reasons as to why he is so anti-psychedelic. And my answer is 5 funerals. Okay. And we are killing, I think last year the number is 92,000 Americans by overdoses. And so I don't deny that in certain cases of mental health need, a professional who knows what they're doing can prescribe something that may help with that for a period of time. But I absolutely do not agree that it's a good idea for amateurs to go out and start buying drugs off the street and thinking that they have a psychedelic or whatever it is, and then getting too much of something or whatever it is. And so it's just idiocy to be talking about that. So if you want to use a psychedelic, go use it with a doctor or other mental health professional that knows how it's properly used. Do not buy it off the street. Do not believe in anything that anybody who won't identify their individual name, such as Chosen One here, says about it, because they're taking no risk. They may be a pusher for all I know.